Sometimes it isn't the drugs, the egos, or bad luck that end a legendary career. It's just one song, and once it hits the airwaves, there's no going back. These are some of the most popular songs from the 60s, 70s, and 80s that were so bad they destroyed careers. Starship, We Built This City, 1985. Imagine being the band that defined the summer of love. Your Jefferson Airplane, the counterculture's heartbeat, performing at Woodstock and fueling the acid rock revolution with anthems of rebellion. Now, fast forward to 1985, and that radical edge has been completely sanded off by the gears of the music biz. You're wearing neon shoulder pads now, cool, and singing a song written by a corporate committee about how much you love rock and roll over a clinical programmed beat. Yeah, doesn't sound great. By the time Grace Slick was lip-syncing to this on MTV, the distance from the era of White Rabbit, it felt like light years. I mean, yes, We Built This City, they built a massive hit. It topped the charts and played in every shopping mall in America, but it was the sound of a legendary legacy being traded for a shiny new lease on a Mercedes. The shift from Jefferson Starship to just plain Starship was basically the band tossing their psychedelic roots out the window and chasing full-on corporate rock polish instead. I mean, yeah, it hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, but that success came at a cost. It completely wrecked the band's artistic credibility, to the point where decades later, the song kept getting voted worst song of all time. We built this city on rock and roll, built this city. So I guess they got the trophy, no question about it, but they lost the soul of the band in the process. And a great band at that. And then after that, they just weren't the voices of a generation anymore. They were just the guys blasting out of the radio that you rushed to turn down. It was a massive commercial win and an absolute artistic execution. The Beach Boys, Get You Back, 1985. Music fans recognize them as the architects of the American summer. But by 1985, the Beach Boys, who gave us God Only Knows and so many incredible hits, were now fighting to just stay on the radio. Following a decade of internal instability, high-profile lawsuits, and the tragic loss of the founding member, Dennis Wilson, the Beach Boys attempted to modernize their sun-drenched image for a high-tech decade, and Get You Back was designed to complete that task. They had the sleek, polished pop of the mid-80s, but it struggled to reconcile the band's 1960s surf rock identity with the 1980s tech. Produced by Terry Melcher, the track utilized the gated reverb drum sounds and heavy digital processing that defined the era's top 40. The culture was moving toward a neon-drenched future, and the Beach Boys were terrified of being left on the shore as a relic of the past. While the song achieved moderate success and was buoyed by a heavy rotation music video, it kind of finalized the band's transition from contemporary innovators to permanent nostalgia act. God only knows what I'd be without you. The reliance on synthetic production and safe lyrical tropes alienated the purists who valued the organic, complex arrangements of, pet sounds. They traded their status as the American answer to the Beatles for a place on the oldies circuit. It was the moment the surf went flat, and they never really recovered that creative spark ever again. The Monkees, Porpoise Song, 1968. Monkees, and people say we monkey around, but we're too busy. The Monkees were sick of being the pre-Fab Four. They were a TV show first and a band second, but they were tired of the bubblegum label and the sneers from the serious rock press. They wanted respect so badly. So they teamed up with a young Jack Nicholson to make a movie called Head, a psychedelic metatextual nightmare designed to dismantle their own brand. But unfortunately, it also kind of mocked their fans for liking them. Yeah, not great. In Porpoise Song, it was the theme, and it was a haunting underwater trip that told their teenage fans that the safe TV characters they loved, they were gone. Released as the lead single from the Head soundtrack, Porpoise Song was written by Jerry Goffin and Carole King, and it finally let the band show a kind of depth that they'd never been allowed to show before. Today, it's widely praised as a psychedelic masterpiece, but back in '68, boy, it landed with a thud. The song completely missed the top 40, which was a huge red flag. Highlighting that the more grown-up artistic direction, it wasn't lining up with their young audience. They eventually got the respect they were chasing, but at the time, it slammed the brakes on the cash flow and brought Monkee mania to a sudden, very real stop. Pat Boone, In the Holy Land, 1968.
Say goodbye to the main attraction. She's the girl that's marrying me.
In 1968, Pat Boone attempted to pivot from his established persona as a clean-cut traditionalist pop star to a more experimental folk psychedelic aesthetic with the album Departure. At a time when youth culture was turning toward mysticism, protest, and radical politics, Boone, the king of wholesome, white-shoed Christian pop, tried to adapt by incorporating sitars and trippy arrangements. And the single In the Holy Land was the focal point of that experiment. Unfortunately, it kinda sounded like a church choir had wandered into a drum circle, and his core audience and everyone was not prepared for that.
The Lord is with you.
The backlash was immediate and visceral. Boone's conservative religious fan base viewed the move as an abandonment of his values and a flirtation with the satanic counterculture. The fallout was so severe that Boone was officially expelled from the Church of Christ for unchristian-like conduct. And his music was blacklisted by the religious institutions that kind of formed the bedrock of his commercial success.
Speedy Gonzales.
So this failed attempt to join the hippie movement resulted in the permanent loss of his primary audience, leaving him without a musical home and effectively ending his era as a mainstream hit maker. Sly and the Family Stone, Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again, 1969. Sly Stone was the king of the party, and in 1969, Everyday People was the anthem of American unity. I mean, they were the multiracial, multigender family that stole the show at Woodstock, representing the peak of 1960s optimism. But by 1970, the pressure of the Black Power movement, intense drug use, and the darkness of the Nixon era had kinda kicked in. And Thank You, yes, it is a funk masterpiece, but it's cold, jagged, and paranoid. Gone was the sunshine. In its place was a heavy thumping bass line and lyrics about being pushed and shoved. It's the sound of the front door being locked from the inside. The track's iconic and innovative slap bass style, pioneered by Larry Graham, changed music history, but its lyrical content signaled a dark transformation. Sly was moving away from the inclusive messaging of his earlier work toward a cynical, isolated worldview. This change also coincided with Sly becoming increasingly unreliable, frequently skipping performances and fracturing the internal structure of the family stone. The party was over. Sly stayed in the mansion, the band started to scatter, and the optimistic vibe that made them superstars was replaced by a decade of missed shows, burned bridges, and broken promises. Billy Joel, We Didn't Start the Fire, 1989. Billy Joel is widely regarded as one of the most sophisticated melodic craftsmen of his generation. Yet his most ubiquitous late career hit is the very song that many critics argued dismantled his reputation as a serious composer. While We Didn't Start the Fire was a significant commercial success, reaching #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, it marked a distinct cooling of critical goodwill toward Joel as a contemporary artist. Coming at the tail end of the Cold War, the song functioned as a rapid-fire history lesson, but its simplistic list-based lyrical structure became a subject of immediate and lasting parody. Joel himself has stated in retrospective interviews with The New Yorker and Rolling Stone that the melody is dreadful, like a fingernail on a blackboard, expressing regret that the track's massive saturation in pop culture overshadowed his more nuanced musical contributions. This song didn't just alienate critics, it functioned as a creative dead end that fundamentally altered the trajectory of Joel's career. Industry analysts point to this era as the moment Joel's identity shifted from a premier American poet to a legacy novelty act, a transition that seemingly sapped his desire to produce new pop music. Shortly after the cycle for the Stormfront and River of Dreams albums, Joel famously walked away from the studio, effectively retiring from songwriting for decades. The overwhelming, inescapable success of We Didn't Start the Fire created a caricature of his talent that he appeared unwilling to compete with, leading him to abandon his role as a contemporary hitmaker in favor of a permanent stationary residency at Madison Square Garden. Creedence Clearwater Revival, Sweet Hitchhiker, 1972. Okay, so John Fogerty was basically a dictator in the studio, and honestly it worked. CCR was the only band that could go toe-to-toe with the Beatles on the charts at their peak. But eventually, his bandmates and own brother had enough, and they pushed back, demanding a so-called democracy where everyone got to write and sing their own material. And in a move that was equal parts stubborn and spiteful, Fogerty gave them exactly what they asked for, but as a punishment. He told them to write and sing their own songs on the album Mardi Gras, fully aware it was gonna be a disaster. He stepped away from the captain's chair and let the ship slam straight into an iceberg, just to prove he was the only one who really knew how to steer it. Sweet Hitchhiker was the lead single, and kind of the only track that even sounded remotely like a classic CCR swamp rock track. But it had no chance of saving the mess all around it. Critics absolutely tore the album apart, with Rolling Stone famously calling it, quote, "the worst record I've ever heard from a major rock band." So yeah, John proved the point, but he burned the entire house down in the process. The band was finished within months, ending a legendary run with a bitter, spite-fueled whimper. They went from the biggest band in America to a bickering memory in less than a year. Frankie Goes to Hollywood, Relax, 1983.
Relax, don't do it. When you wanna go to it, relax, don't.
The immense success of Relax was a phenomenon of 1980s marketing, driven largely by a controversial music video and a well-timed ban by the BBC. In the hyper-vibrant culture of '83, the Frankie Say Relax t-shirts were everywhere, making the band a ubiquitous presence in fashion and music simultaneously. They were the biggest thing on the planet, but it was a fame built on shock value and high-gloss production by Trevor Horn, rather than a sustainable band dynamic. They were a firework that went off all at once, leaving very little behind once the smoke cleared. You see, that high-gloss production created a level of sonic perfection that the band struggled to replicate live or on subsequent recordings.
When you wanna come, when you wanna come.
Once the shock value and the marketing blitz subsided, intense internal friction and a lack of creative cohesion led to a rapid decline in interest. The group disbanded after only 2 albums, serving as a textbook case of a band whose artistic identity was entirely consumed by the very hype that created it. They were the t-shirt band of the decade, and once that trend passed, the industry moved on to the next big thing. The Village People, Food Fight, 1981. The Village People might be the kings of the disco era, but when the 1970s party finally ended, they didn't just leave the club, they accidentally walked off a cliff. By 1981, the Disco Sucks movement had turned violent. Disco records were being burned in stadiums, and the group was in a state of professional panic. After all, they were kind of the global faces of a genre that was being systematically dismantled and hated, and they knew their time was running out. So in a bid for survival, they adopted the most extreme aesthetic of the era. They donned leather, spiked their hair, and released a punk rock track titled Food Fight. It was a total identity crisis caught on tape. A frantic attempt to stay relevant by infiltrating a tougher underground scene. A scene that wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. And that pivot was a catastrophic failure. Their disco fans felt betrayed by the sudden lack of glitter and fun, while the actual punk fans saw the track as a pathetic, mocking caricature of their culture. Food Fight was a song that pleased absolutely no one, and it effectively ended their run as a hit-making group instantly, as they were now seen as a joke by both sides of the musical divide. They weren't disco enough for the clubs, and they weren't punk enough for the streets. They just ended up in the clearance bin as a reminder of how fast the industry can turn on its icons. Billy Squier, Rock Me Tonight, 1984. Billy Squier's career serves as a primary example of how visual presentation could terminate musical momentum in the MTV era. In 1984, Squier was a multi-platinum arena rocker with a macho image, often viewed as the heir to Led Zeppelin. However, the music video for Rock Me Tonight, directed by Kenny Ortega, was a catastrophic miscalculation. It featured Squier performing interpretive dance moves in a pastel pink bedroom, a visual that was completely at odds with his blue-collar rock audience. And in the time it took to play a 3-minute song, his cool factor was permanently incinerated. Squier has explicitly admitted in Rolling Stone and Esquire that he, quote, paid a heavy price for that video, noting that his standing with rock radio and his core fanbase just collapsed immediately. Music historians at VH1 and the New York Times cite this as the definitive visual suicide. Despite his previous success, the industry machine simply shut off. Promoters noticed reduced excitement and ticket sales just plummeted. He did continue to release albums, but he never returned to that pre-1984 status. The video didn't just hurt the song, it ended his era as a rock god. Chuck Berry, My Ding-a-Ling, 1972.
People coming from miles around to hear you play your music when the sun go down.
Chuck Berry pretty much invented the rock and roll guitar hero. He was the guy who taught an entire generation of 1960s rock stars how the electric guitar was supposed to sound. And yet, his only #1 hit was not a Stone Cold classic like Johnny B. Good or Maybelline. Nope, it was a live recording of a goofy, slightly dirty schoolyard rhyme about his ding-a-ling. By the early 70s, nostalgia was in the air, and this not-so-subtle joke song took off with a public that suddenly wanted novelty more than innovation. It was a huge hit, but it turned out to be a trap that followed him for the rest of his life. It quietly shifted his image from pioneer to punchline, turning a legend into a kind of dirty old man novelty act. Sure, he got the gold record and the chart success, but he lost something far more important along the way.
Down and take my ding-a-ling-a-ling. Oh my.
He wasn't seen as revolutionary anymore, he was more of a joke. And for his final decades, he toured as a legacy act tied to one silly song instead of being celebrated properly as the true architect of rock. Pink Floyd, Comfortably Numb, 1979. In the context of Pink Floyd's The Wall, Comfortably Numb is regarded as a zenith of the David Gilmour and Roger Waters collaboration, featuring a guitar solo often cited as the greatest of all time. However, the production of the track served as the definitive death knell for the band's internal camaraderie. The culture of the band had become one of total authoritarianism, with Waters' management leading to the official dismissal of founding keyboardist Richard Wright during these very sessions. The bickering over the song's arrangement created a toxic environment that made future work just impossible. The disagreements over Comfortably Numb, with Gilmour wanting a harder rock edge and Waters wanting an orchestral feel, served as the final breaking point for the Waters-Gilmour partnership. While the song is a global masterpiece that defines the band's legacy, it also functioned as a beautiful funeral for the band's brotherhood. By the time the world was singing along to Comfortably Numb, the band was already a corpse. They were comfortably numb, and they would now spend the next several decades in and out of court. Sinead O'Connor, War, 1992. Sinead O'Connor was sitting right at the top of the mountain. She had Nothing Compares to You, a voice that stopped people in their tracks, and the entire world in the palm of her hand. And then in October of 1992, she walked onto that SNL stage, sang Bob Marley's War, completely a cappella, and tore up a photo of Pope John Paul II. You see, she was protesting child abuse within the Catholic Church, but the media climate of the early 90s just wasn't ready for something that blunt or that bold. And in less than 10 seconds, she went from Grammy-winning superstar to national villain.
Over evil.
The fallout hit fast and it hit hard. She was booed off stages at major events, her records were crushed by steamrollers during public protests, and radio airplay all but disappeared overnight. Nowadays, most people see that moment as a brave stand against systematic abuse, but back then it effectively pulled the plug on her mainstream career at its absolute peak. This one's different though, because she knew exactly what she was doing and she did it anyway, willingly trading superstardom for a message she believed in. The industry never really let her back through the door, and she spent the rest of her career working on the fringes instead of at the center where she once stood. The Eagles, Best of My Love, the 1980 Long Beach implosion.
Them say, welcome to the Hotel California.
While the Eagles are synonymous with the polished, harmonious sound of 1970s California rock, their reign as the biggest band in the world ended with a public confrontation that was anything but peaceful. July 31st, 1980, it was a performance in Long Beach, California, and it's etched in music history as the Long Night at Long Beach, the moment the group finally collapsed in front of thousands of fans. By this point, the band was at the zenith of its commercial power, yet they were internally disintegrating under the combined weight of heavy drug use, massive egos, and years of bitter resentment over who truly controlled the group. During a performance of Best of My Love, the stage microphones picked up guitarists Glenn Frey and Don Felder trading physical threats between their signature vocal harmonies.
Oh, you were trying to give me the best of your love.
At one point, Frey was clearly heard whispering to Felder, "Only 3 more songs until I kick your blank, pal." A level of hostility that was obvious to anyone sitting in the front, maybe 10 rows. There is a profound dark irony here, in the fact that they were performing their most gentle, peaceful ballad while actively plotting a physical assault on one another. It was a performance that highlighted the complete breakdown of the band's brotherhood. They were threatening to kill each other while singing about the best of their love.
There's a new kid in town.
The group disbanded pretty much immediately after that set, triggering a 14-year hiatus that saw the members refuse to even be in the same room. They barely made it to the parking lot, and then guitars were smashed and limos were speeding away in opposite directions. Alright, by the time these songs hit the radio, the damage was already done. Some of them sounded harmless, some were massive hits, and some even felt bold or brave in the moment, but every one of them flipped a switch that could not be flipped back. Careers stalled, reputations cracked, and bands that once felt untouchable suddenly found themselves on the outside looking in. So that's enough from me, now we really need to hear from you. Which of these songs and feuds still blows your mind? Which one did you actually live through when it happened? What was the most unfortunate breakup that I talked about? Please drop your memories in the comments below, and if I forgot a story, please tell me which one. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that little thumbs up icon, we certainly appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that changed music history forever. But most importantly, from my entire team here at Do You Remember, I'm Nostalgic Nick, and until next time, remember, sometimes one song is all it takes to change everything.